All right, it's summertime. It's time for Wimbledon, and who better to break it down than a woman who has won there, a Grand Slam champion, a coach, a former player, and the host of Amazon Prime's Sports Power Hour, Rennae Stubbs, my good friend. Hey, thanks for joining me for a couple minutes.
Hey, you're welcome. Anytime for you, my friend.
The new show is fantastic. You talk to so many players. For tennis fans, you have to go check it out on Amazon Prime Sports because you get a lot of context, analysis, insight into the sport. So make sure that you go there. But let's get into Wimbledon a little bit. Have to start with the big headline, Novak Djokovic, what else is new? But going for this 24th slam and going to tie Roger Federer's Wimbledon record, is there any question in your mind that he is the greatest we've ever seen?
Look, so many people talk about, who's the greatest and all that sort of stuff. When it comes to the actual stats, then there's no doubt that Novak Djokovic is now the greatest player of all time. He's been the world's number one, the longest out of anybody. He's won the most Grand Slams. He's won the most Masters 1000. So when it comes to all the stat categories, there is nobody that will pass him, I don't think, in the history of tennis. Although never say never, I guess. Carlos Alcaraz has already said that he wants to be the greatest of all time. Well, he better hurry up because Novak, at 23, I truly believe this year, even more so when he actually went for the calendar Grand Slam, losing in the finals of the US Open to Daniil Medvedev, I actually think he's in better shape this year. I think not mixing in the Olympics, which I think really threw as we say, spanner in the works. I think he was exhausted mentally by the time he got to that final against Medvedev. I think he's unbeatable at Wimbledon. Whoever beats him is going to have the match of their life. And I really think that he's going to march and be on the precipice of a calendar Grand Slam at the US Open.
Physically, the shape that he keeps himself in, his mental preparation, which to me perhaps is the most impressive thing about him.
Yeah.
How many more slams could he potentially win?
Oh, well, I think he's going to win. I've already said two more this year. I think he's going to win US Open and Wimbledon. And just back on that, I think if he does that, there's just absolutely will never be a question for him to have a calendar Grand Slam. That hasn't been done since Rod Laver, so it's been a long time. So I think he'll set himself apart from Roger and Rafa. But that's the thing about Novak. I think that he's probably going to end up. I said about 3 years ago that I thought he would end up with about 27 or 28, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's what he ends up with. He's at 23 now, so if he wins two more, it's 25. And his body and the way he takes care of himself, and actually believe it or not, I think actually adding all the sort of vaccination stuff and not playing will extend his career because he didn't have that extra stress on his body. Now, pundits might say that he would have already had 24 or 25 Grand Slams by now if he hadn't, stayed away from the Australian Open and US Open because of vaccination status. So I don't know. There's the positives and negatives to that. And I think one of them is the fact that physically he's probably in a little bit better shape.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that before, that maybe there was some burnout there, and the fact that he missed all that time, which a lot of people thought would count against him, might actually be a positive. A
Yeah.
lot of people who love the sport are already excited about the possibility of seeing another Alcaraz Djokovic showdown. If Carlos is going to be able to be competitive, what must he do better at Wimbledon?
Well, control his emotions. That's just the bottom line. That's what got the better of him at the French Open physically. He started cramping in the third set, which is just highly unusual. This is a guy that is as fit as anybody in the world. He's quicker than anyone on the tennis court. He has the tenacity and the belief in himself. So none of that is the issue. The issue for him was that he admitted it after the match. He was very, very nervous in the first set. And all the eyes were on this match. Could this be the moment where men's tennis switches and Carlos Alcaraz beats Novak and ascends himself to world number one again and wins another Grand Slam and sort of says, okay, well, maybe Novak's time has passed, but that wasn't the case. And Novak looked like the 25-year-old, I wouldn't say 20-year-old, because I think one of the things about Carlos is he's still so young. He's 20 years of age. So at 20, you don't quite know how to handle those big moments. So I think he hopefully, and he has stated, that he would have learned a huge lesson from the French Open and being too hyped up, too anxious, too nervous, and just take it like another match. And then if he can handle the emotional side of it and control, therefore, his body, because the cramping wasn't due to lack of fitness. It was due to the fact that the nerves and the anxiety cause your body to go into spasms like that by the time you get to a third set. I think you would have learned a lot about being able to control and calm down. As you know, I like to say, calm the farm. And so I think if he learned from that experience and he can handle his emotions, absolutely he can win against Novak. But he's learning to play on grass as well. A lot of these players like Novak and Rafa, for example, had to learn how to play and move, particularly move on grass. The movement side of grass is where everything differs. You have to tread differently. You have to not be quite as explosive out on the really green stuff or you'll fall over. So there's little things to learn. Roger Federer, for example, it was like he was born on grass. He was so natural on it. He was light on his feet. And therefore, at a young age, beating Pete Sampras, that's when the men's game turned around. So, yeah, do I think Carlos will learn and get it eventually? Absolutely.
Is there anybody else on the men's side that has a natural propensity towards grass that you think could threaten or surprise?
You know, not really. Not when it comes to playing best of five. I mean, could someone beat Novak on grass in best of three? Yes, because they could have a huge serving day. He might not be able to break them, and then it could get to a tiebreak. Although the worst thing in the history of tennis, it seems these days, is playing Novak Djokovic in a tiebreak. I feel like I haven't seen him lose a tiebreak in about a decade, when it really counts. So I think that when it comes to best of five sets, I think it's almost impossible to beat Novak unless he's having a horrific day himself, or he's a little injured, or maybe you serve out of your mind and you get a bit lucky on a couple of returns. But I just think he's so solid, Novak, in all of these situations that I don't really see. I mean, Yannick Sinner could have the match of his life and maybe push him. Alcaraz, obviously. You would say a fit, healthy Nick Kyrgios, but that's not happening. He's not fit and he's not in shape. So, can a Holger Rune, also 20 years of age, could he have the match of his life? Yes, of course. But I just find it's going to be impossible.
It's almost like somebody has to just, like you said, hope that you get a less than 100% version of him physically if you even have a chance. And then, oh, by the way, you have to play out of your mind. I think it's all the tie breaks for me, which is why I feel like his mental fortitude is perhaps the most impressive thing about him. But, for you as a former player, an analyst, a coach, that both sides are just remarkable. But what is it about him that you find particularly special?
Somebody said it to me the other day. Andrea Pekovic, our mutual friend, said he's not the prettiest tennis player, and that's the thing. He doesn't have this unique style, right? Rafa has this unique style with the left hand and just him, right? The hair and the backhand, everything about him being very different. The lefty sort of play. Roger was so beautiful to watch as a tennis player. Just had the most classic strokes, whereas Novak sort of doesn't he doesn't distinct himself to anyone, right? He sort of plays like just very average style of tennis, but he doesn't miss, and he retrieves the ball back so well. He stays calm in the biggest of moments. His serve is I would not teach his surface motion, but yet it's so effective. I think he's just learned through the years, Carolyn, like his forehand back early in his career was not great. And now it's probably his best shot, even though everyone talks about his backhand being unbelievable, and his backhand technically is so beautiful. His forehand's a little weird, not weird, but it's just not as pretty. But yet it's probably his most effective shot now, and his serve. And early in his career, those two, I would say, were his weakest shots, were his serve and forehand. He's learned to come into the net. He's learned to play. He's just an all-around great player. There's nowhere on the tennis court that is safe against Novak Djokovic.
Let's touch on the women's side. Iga Swiatek, obviously a woman that a lot of people are pointing towards. Although reading a little bit about her past performance on grass, it seems like that's not necessarily a place of strength for her. How do you view her chances?
Yeah, which I think is funny because she won junior Wimbledon. So she knows how to play at Wimbledon. She knows how to win a title at Wimbledon. I know it's very different on grass, and it's very different in juniors than it is in the pros. And the reason why is because power now, right? So in juniors, even though someone could be a really good young player, they didn't quite have the power to be able to overpower someone like an Iga Swiatek. So when you see a Rybakina, for example, or a Sabalenka, these big players that have threatened and beaten Iga over the last 12 months in big matches, they have the power and the serve to be able to hit her off the court on grass, because she doesn't have quite the time she does on clay. She has a really extreme grip on her forehand, and so if you get it fast to her forehand, she pulls up on it. She doesn't have the same control on clay. On clay, she can mix it up with a bit of height, get the ball back deep, use her speed and athleticism around the court to set up the point again. Whereas on grass, you don't have time to reset the point. When someone is really nailing the ball, you're playing defense, you have no chance on grass. So she has to control the point from the get-go, and sometimes her serve, because it's not as big as a Sabalenka or Rybakina, for example, and her second serve in particular, it can get attacks. And so if you're behind in the point right at the beginning, you're in trouble on grass. And so, these big hitters like Rybakina and Sabalenka in particular have massive serves. So if you're not holding serve, you're losing, because they're going to hold serve a lot of the time. So I think on grass, it's a matter of her feeling like, first of all, mentally she can play on it. And she's doing a great job this week, for example. She's actually in the semifinals of a tournament in Germany. So she's won a few matches on grass. So maybe now she starts to think, oh, okay, I can play on. Actually, this grass she's playing on this week is very different to what Wimbledon is. Wimbledon is a bit higher, bouncing, and it is slightly slower. So that actually does help Iga. So I think this week, winning a few matches on grass may help her mentally going into Wimbledon. I still don't think she's the favourite, just because she's never really done well at Wimbledon. But I don't count out Iga Swiatek in any situation. But I still think a Rybakina or Sabalenka are a little bit more favoured.
Which American woman do you think has the best chance of making a deep run?
Well, I mean, I don't understand why. Well, I do now, because I just interviewed her, Jessica Pegula. I think Jessica Pegula has the best game to play on grass. She just hits the ball so flat and hard. But the problem, again, is the serve. She doesn't have a big serve. So on grass, if you're not holding serve, you're not winning, because so many of these better players will hold serve. So because they possess huge serves, we're talking 115, 120 miles an hour that they can pop down like a Rybakina and Sabalenka. And when you look at even Ons Jabeur, she can pop down her serve every now and again. But Ons Jabeur has the variety, which is why she's done well on grass in the past, even though she's having a horrendous year for her standards this year. I just think Jessica's should be better on grass, but yesterday she just got really she got beaten handily by Coco Gauff. And one of the reasons why Coco, I think, is better on grass than Jess, for example, is because she possesses a massive serve. And she also can rip the backhand, and her movement around the court is so exceptional. Jess really doesn't like moving on grass. And one of the reasons is she has hurt herself in the past on it. She has torn ACLs before. So that is in the back of your mind, makes you a bit afraid to move on the surface, because you've got to be light on your feet and you have to learn to play on grass with the movement. And she told me, she still struggles, and mentally it's tough for her to move on grass. So if she can get over that part, she should do well. But to answer your question, probably Coco Gauff.
I mean, that's got to be great for American fans who are kind of wondering, even just the casual fans, the water cooler fans that are like, come on, Coco, let's go, let's go. I mean, just quickly, because I know you got to actually jump on a plane and get over to London now. When you look at Coco, some of Coco's recent past performances, I mean, even though she is the American, in your opinion, that might have the best chance to do well, what hump does she need to get over next to really find some of that consistency?
Well, I mean, it's obvious. So it gets talked about in the press and commentary all the time. Her forehand's her weakness. She has an unbelievably extreme grip, which does Iga Swiatek as well. And that's a bit of a problem on grass, because the ball shoots through so fast that you don't get. It's really hard when you have a very extreme Western grip to be able to hit the ball as comfortably on grass, because the ball's on you so fast. So I think that's always going to be the issue for her. Her second serve can be vulnerable at times. When it comes to the heart, there's nobody better than Coco. She fights as well as anyone. She's humble. She works hard, all of the things. She does have quite a few weapons, and that's important, the first serve in particular, and the backhand, and her speed around the court. But it's the forehand that's going to continually get picked on by a big hitter like a Rybakina or a Sabalenka. And I mentioned those two, but because those two are, in my opinion, the favourite to win the tournament. So it's getting, when she gets to quarters, semis and finals, she's playing against those great players that have massive weapons. So they're going to pick on her forehand, and if it's not working, she gets pretty down. And so that's it. One person I want to throw into the list of players that maybe could do well for the Americans is Sofia Kenin, who qualified. This is the Australian Open champion of 2020, right before the pandemic. She was literally one of the best 2 or 3 players in the world. And there's not a weakness in her game. She can play from anywhere in the court. And then the pandemic had hit, and she just really suffered the most out of everybody. She had some, issues with her father and with family issues and coaches and all this sort of stuff when she came back and started playing back after the pandemic. But if there was one player that I really feel sorry for in that respect with the pandemic, was Sofia Kenin. She was literally probably the best player in the world coming out of the Australian Open. And she had to qualify at Wimbledon this week. So think about that. This is a player that made the finals of the French and won the Australian Open, more accomplished than many players on the tour, and qualified. So I actually think that was massive for her to get through qualifying, because I think that'll give her a huge amount of confidence going in here. No one's going to want to play her on the grass at Wimbledon, and she can actually be really dangerous on grass. So look out for a little sneaky Sofia Kenin.